There is a particular cruelty in a city that is forever at home to someone else. In the autumn of that year, the town of Bath was such a city, bright and crowded and turning upon its own amusement, like a wheel that wanted no hand to drive it. The season had come in on the first hard frosts, and after it came the carriages and the calling cards and the long lit windows behind which the fortunate settled themselves into couples and quarrels and futures. Every good street was a street of open doors. They opened upon warmth and music, and the smell of beeswax and forced flowers, and they opened, every one of them, for somebody. That was the honest truth of an open door. It was never open to the world. It stood open only to the one the world had already consented to let inside an invitation. In a place so made was a species of money. A woman with a store of them might go anywhere she pleased. A woman with none could stand in the very heart of all that glitter, and be as thoroughly shut out as though she stood alone on the fell at midnight. Bath was brimful of warmth that autumn, and not a measure of it fell to the one who stood outside in the greatest want of it. Away to the north, meanwhile, in a country of stone and hard weather where the season sent no carriages and kindled no windows, there lived a man who had passed 11 years sending back every invitation that reached him with the seal unbroken. Society laughed at him when it troubled to recall him at all. It could not make sense of a door barred upon its inner side. A shut door affronts the world a great deal more than a cold one, for a cold door may still be forced, while a barred door announces plainly that the world is not wanted. No one had yet thought to lay these two facts side by side: the woman to whom no door would open, and the man who would open his door to none. No one could have supposed that the season would close with the one refusing the other, and that the refusal would be the saving of them both. That, however, lay all ahead. On the afternoon where this begins, there was only a young woman upon a doorstep in a handsome square, standing while a housekeeper read her letter of character a second time and worked out the civil way to be rid of her. Cassia Marrow was 24 years of age. She held herself very straight upon the step, for straightness was one of the few possessions left to her that could be kept without spending, and she folded her hand so that the thin, worn place on her right glove should not be seen. She had mastered that small art across the last 2 years, along with a good many others. She had learned to stretch one meal across a whole day, to sleep upright in a coaching inn so that no one might rifle her case, and to bring out her own name last of everything, for the instant she gave it the conversation was at an end. The housekeeper glanced up from the letter. She had been near to friendly a moment earlier, since the hand that had written the character was plainly a gentlewoman's and the words within it kind. Now a guarded emptiness came down across her face like a shutter drawn against a low sun. "Marrow," she said, "you will be the physician's daughter, out of Wiltshire." "I am his daughter, yes." "Place was advertised this morning, and it is taken," the housekeeper said, and put the letter back out through the grudging gap of the door, as though it were a thing she would rather not have handled. "I would not go on to the other houses in the square, were I in your shoes. Talk moves quickly here. There is no situation in Bath for that name, nor will there ever be one. Try a town that does not read its papers so closely. Good afternoon to you." The door came to. It did not slam. That was the bitterest part of it. A slammed door is at least a kind of temper, and temper may be answered. This door closed the way a book of accounts is closed, softly, upon a total already reckoned and set down. Cassia stood in the thinning light and understood, fully and finally, that the woman had told her nothing but the truth. She had known it a fortnight, and declined to know it. Now the knowing had her. Every respectable house in Bath had refused her one upon another, a few with pity and the most of them without, and always for the one reason, and the reason would never grow softer, because the thing that had broken her father was not a thing that time wore away. It was written down. It sat in the record of an assize, and it had stood in the newspapers a whole raw spring in the boldest letters the presses held, and every soul who counted for anything had read it through. Her father had been Dr. Edmund Marrow, a physician of small means and large conscience, who had tended the great houses and the poor cottages of his county upward of 30 years, and had never once, that any man could point to, done a slovenly thing. Then a wealthy patient of his died in the night of what the physician swore was one cause and 3 other gentlemen swore was quite another. A file was brought into it, a measure was named. It was put about that the good doctor had mistaken his dose, or worse than mistaken it, and that an old woman of fortune had died beneath his hand, for the sake of a bequest she had left to the parish he loved. The word the papers printed was poison. The word underneath the word, which they were too prudent to print, and every reader supplied at no charge, was murder. Her father was undone inside a week, and dead inside the year of an ailment no physician among them would name, which is to say of shame. Cassia had been 22. She had sat in the gallery of the court and heard him say, in a voice she could not own for his, that he had not done the thing, that in 30 years he had never given any living creature a grain, he had not weighed twice over, and would not as gladly have swallowed himself. She had believed him and believed him still. It weighed nothing against a single door in Bath. A daughter's belief was not evidence, and to the most of them not even a curiosity. Her mother's ring she had let go in the 2nd week, to a buyer who knew to the penny how poorly she stood to refuse him. She reckoned what remained as she walked, though she had the figure by heart to the last farthing, for the reckoning was the small hard labor that had held her upright through the worst of the way. There was enough for 4 nights more at the inn, or 5, if she went without her supper, which she had already settled to do. Beyond that, she would not let her thoughts travel. Hunger, past a certain depth, she had discovered, turns quiet rather than loud. It does not roar. It only thins the world about a person, so that the frost bites deeper, and the doorsteps stand higher, and the little sums grow harder to keep hold of. She had until the last of the light to decide whether she still had the courage to be a stranger among strangers in a town that did not know her, or whether her courage had simply given out at last the way coin gives out, in small, unmarked sums, until one morning there is none. She turned out of the square with her one case in her hand, the case that held the whole of what she owned upon the earth, and she did not look back at the black door and its bright brass. It was in the street beyond that the carriage overtook her. She heard it before ever she saw it, the weighty particular note of a good carriage on cold paving, and she stepped aside without turning, as a person on foot soon learns to do. It did not go by. It checked. It halted. A footman, in plain dark livery, no badge upon it, stepped down and approached her, and inquired, very correct and wholly incurious, whether he addressed Miss Marrow. She owned that he did. What he could want of her, she was at a loss to imagine. The footman held out a letter, a single sheet folded once and sealed with a plain seal that told her nothing whatever. Her own name stood on the outer face of it, drawn in a plain, deliberate hand that was strange to her. She broke the seal where she stood, her cold fingers turned stupid on the fold, braced for she could not have said what. A summons. An insult. Some final account of her father's fallen due at last against the daughter. The letter ran to 3 lines only. It offered her the situation of companion to Lady Honoria, his godmother, at Thornwood Hall in Northumberland, at £60 by the year, and said the carriage would carry her north the moment she was ready to come. No name was set beneath it. In place of a name there stood, at the very foot of the sheet, a single letter drawn larger than all the rest, in the manner of a man well used to setting his mark to a great deal. It was the letter R. Cassia read it through twice. Then she looked to the footman, who looked back with the trained composure of a servant taught that wondering aloud is a fault, and she put to him the only question that signified. Whose carriage is this? His Grace's. Mrs. Grace of where? Ravensmere, miss. And Cassia Marrow, who had thought there was nothing remaining in the world with power to frighten her, felt the cold reach a little further in, for she knew that name as well. Everyone knew that name, It passed about the same drawing rooms that had lately closed against her, spoken low, behind a lifted hand, with the peculiar pleasure people save for a great man they are allowed to pity. The Duke of Ravensmere was the Duke who would have no one. There were any number of tales told to explain him, and the town had never bothered to fix upon which was the true one, since a tale serves better when it can be turned several ways. Some held he had been crossed in love as a young man, and had forsworn the whole sex of women in a fit of pride he was far too obstinate ever to unsay. Some held he had loved a woman who died, and had gone into the ground with her, and would not turn his face toward a living one for dread of the measuring. The gentler sort said sorrow, the harder sort said pride. The one thing all of them held between them was the plain fact of it. For 11 years the Duke of Ravensmere had refused every lady laid before him. He had refused the beauties and the fortunes, the clever and the meek alike, and the mothers who dragged their daughters north on the frailest of errands, and the daughters after them. He came so rarely into company that his refusals had grown into a kind of fable, a thing the season murmured to itself as children murmur the tale of a room that is always locked. A man who desired nothing that anyone alive had to give him. It was not a name a prudent woman would trust her fortunes to. Cassia looked at the 3 lines, and at the single letter, and at the warm, dark carriage that stood waiting with its door held wide upon a folded rug, and the promise of somewhere out of the wind. She thought of the town that did not read its papers. She thought of 4 nights at the inn, or 5 with no supper. She thought how little of her courage remained to her, and how little of freedom there is in the choosing of a person who has run out of all the things a free choice is made from. "Why should such a man send for me?" she said aloud to the footman, to the letter, to the going light. "He has never once looked upon my face. Every soul that has heard my name has taught me the worth of it. It buys the outer side of a door and not one thing beyond." The footman had no answer to give her. It was not his office to have one. The horses shifted in the cold, the light drained out of the top of the sky. And Cassia Marrow did what a person does when there is in truth nothing left to choose between. She got up into the carriage. It was warm within, warmer than any place she had been in a fortnight, and she drew the folded rug about her and thought the less of herself for how good the warmth was. The carriage bore her out of Bath as the lamps were being lit, and then out of the soft green country she had known all her life, north and north again, into a land she had heard named only as one hears of the outer edge of a map. They were 3 days upon the road, and with every day the country grew broader and barer and more truthful, the hedges giving way to walls of dry-laid stone that ran up over the shoulders of the hills and were gone, the sky widening until it took the greater share of the world. Cassia watched it from the window, and found to her own surprise that it did not frighten her, as the doors of Bath had frightened her. Nothing in it wished her ill. There was only weather, and distance, and stone, and no one of the 3 had ever read a newspaper. Thornwood Hall, when she reached it on the 3rd evening, was not the house she had steeled herself against. She had built a picture of it across 3 days of travel, out of every tale she had heard of the man who held it. A cold house, she had reasoned, for a cold master something shuttered and half under Holland cloth. All barred windows and long passages where a footfall perished unheard. She had made herself ready for grimness, because grimness she knew how to face. Thornwood was no such thing. It was a long, low house of gray northern stone that had grown up out of its own hillside over the centuries, with no plan anyone could name, a wing set on here, and a gable raised there by men long in their graves, until the whole of it had settled into the land as though it had been cut entire and lowered down complete. And it was lit. Every window she could make out burned a soft, steady gold against the deep blue dusk, and the smoke rose straight and unhurried from a full dozen chimneys into the still air, and the whole house wore, even in that iron country, at that iron hour, the single look she had least expected, and was least ready to answer. It wore the look of a place that was loved, that undid her composure more surely than any grimness might have. She climbed down stiff and frozen and afraid into the courtyard, and a housekeeper came to her with a lantern and a broad, anxious, kindly face, a woman by the name of Mrs. Aldous, who lifted Cassia's frozen case out of her grip as tenderly as if it had held something precious, and fussed at the state of her, and had her indoors out of the wind before ever she had found her voice. She was given a room. A fire was already burning in it, and had plainly been burning a good while, for it had sunk to that deep, even glow a fire reaches only when it has been laid and fed and minded across an hour or more. A covered dish stood upon the table by the window, and a jug of hot water breathed its steam into the basin, and the bed had been turned back against her arrival. "Was I looked for so nearly as this?" Cassia asked when she was able. "You could not have known the hour I should come." "The fire was to be kept in from noon of each day this week, miss, and the water hot from 4. Against your coming at whatever hour it fell," said Mrs. Aldous, and then a small private puzzlement passed over the kind face as of a woman turning a thing about that she had not fully got to the bottom of. His Grace gave the order with his own mouth. He came up to this room himself 2 mornings since, to see it aired, and the chimney drawing sweet. He is not a man to trouble over the guest chambers as a rule. I could not tell you what moved him to take such pains over this one. He tells nobody the why of anything he does, but he took them. She squared a curtain and crossed to the doorway. "You'll be wanting to sit close in and get the road out of your bones. We keep no ceremony at Thornwood, miss, there being nobody here to keep it with. Ring if you have need of anything, and if none should come, walk out and find us, for the bells of this house are older than sense." She went out, and Cassia stood before the fire and could make nothing of it for a while together. Not in 2 years had a soul warmed a hearth for her that she had not first asked for and then paid for. She had half forgotten there were houses in the world where such a thing was only done, and done ahead of your coming, and no reckoning of it kept up against your name. She held her cold hands to the glow, and named it nothing to herself, only that a house so large kept 100 fires alight and would never miss the one. But a duke had climbed the stairs himself to see the chimney drew clean for a companion he had never met, and she had no notion what to do with that. And so she did nothing with it but stand and be warm, which she had not truly been in longer than she cared to count. She met Lady Honoria that same evening, and Lady Honoria, at least, could be understood. The Duke's godmother was a small, upright woman, well past 70. Her face all fine, sharp lines, her eyes a bright, unresting black that let nothing pass before them nor much behind. She made good in words the whole of what her godson left unsaid, and she began the instant Cassia was shown in, a dry, unbroken commentary upon the road and the weather and the follies of the South, and it was some little time before Cassia grasped that the talk itself was a kindness. The old woman had marked her fright and was drawing a cover over it, granting her time, requiring of her nothing at all, beyond that she sit near the warmth and let the words run past like water until the trembling had gone from her. "You are wondering why you have been fetched here," Lady Honoria said at length, setting down her cup and pinning Cassia with the black eyes. "Naturally you are. Any woman with a grain of wit would be. I shall tell you the portion I am able to tell, which is my own, and little enough. I am old and I am wearing, and 4 companions have come and gone from me inside 3 winters. The 4th sent off crying, a thing I own with no pride. My godson wearied of the labor of replacing them, and said he would find me one himself, and he has found you. That is the sum of what I know of the business. Whether you will suit me, I cannot say. Whether I shall suit you, I can say still less. But here you are, and the winter is nearly down on us, and neither of us has a better place to be. So we had as well try the thing. Why me?" said Cassia. She had not meant to ask it so baldly. "But your godson has never set eyes on me, and there is my name to reckon with besides." She halted, as she had drilled herself to halt upon the lip of it. "You will know my name. Lady Honoria. The old woman regarded her a long moment out of those bright, unhurried eyes. "I know your name," she said. "I knew it before ever you came." And she added not one word more upon the head of it, which was an answer of its own kind, and turned the talk to the ordering of Cassia's days, so that Cassia saw she had come up against the near border of what Lady Honoria meant to tell. The remainder lay somewhere else in that quiet house, in the keeping of a man she had not yet rightly seen. She saw him the following morning. She had risen before the light was fairly up, sleep having refused her in so unfamiliar a bed, and had gone down through the hushed house to seek the library out, having been told the night before that she might use it as she chose. The prospect of a whole room of books had been the single cheering thing she had taken up to bed with her. She found it at the end of a long paneled passage, and it stopped her upon the threshold, for it was a fine room, tall and deep and ringed about with a gallery, holding more books than she had seen in any one place since her father's own small goods shelves were carried out of doors and sold upon the step to satisfy men he had never owed. Something in her breast that had been held tight for 2 years loosened a little at the sight of them. She had gone perhaps 3 paces into the room before she knew herself not alone, and turned, and the Duke of Ravensmere stood in the doorway behind her watching. She had not heard him come. In time she would learn that he crossed his own house as quietly as he did all things else. He was tall and dark, his dark hair gone gray too soon at the temples, his face still and hard and giving up nothing. His eyes were a strange, clear gray, the gray of that country's sky before snow, and they came to rest upon her with an attention so entire and so wholly without sound that she felt it settle over her like a weight and had to hold herself from giving ground beneath it. She had braced across 3 days of road against whatever such a man might want of a young woman taken into his house off the open street, assuring herself she knew the shape it would take and would meet it with a straight back, as she had met all the rest. In the first moment of those gray eyes, she saw that she had braced against altogether the wrong thing. There was no wanting in them of the kind she had dreaded. There was some other thing in them entirely, a thing she had no word ready to hand for, a thing that looked, past all sense, like the weight of something owed. "Your Grace," she said, and made her curtsy, for she could think of nothing else to do. He bent his head to her. He held his silence. His eyes stayed on her a moment more, and she had the strangest feeling that he was reading her through, the whole of her, the mended glove and the straight back, and the 2 hard years set plain in her face, and laying the total of it away somewhere careful in himself, where it should not be lost. Then he crossed to the long table beneath the window, and took up a slip of paper that lay in wait there, and wrote 3 or 4 words upon it in the plain, deliberate hand she knew now from the letter, and left it lying, and went out, the whole of it done without a syllable and without once again meeting her eyes. When she was certain he had gone, she went to the table. The paper told her, in that deliberate hand, that the library was hers. At any hour she wished, and asked of her only that she not let the fire die before he came at first light, for he read there early and liked to find it burning. Nothing beyond that. No greeting, no name. She stood holding the thing, and Cassia Marrow, who had put weeping away 2 years since as a habit she could no longer afford, felt a sudden heat come up behind her eyes for no cause that she could have named, and did not understand it in the smallest degree. Her first weeks at Thornwood she passed in waiting for the reckoning to be named. The 2 years at her back had schooled her thoroughly. Nothing came free of charge. They had taught her, and the gifts that wore the kindest face were only the ones whose bill was rendered latest and steepest, so that she had grown to mistrust a warm hearth in the very degree she had once been glad of it. And so she watched. She watched for the hour the Duke's silence would turn in her hand, for the demand she felt sure lay coiled somewhere under all this courtesy, for the hook set into the lit fire and the fair wages in the library that was hers at any hour she pleased. She watched for the closing of the hand. The hand did not close. There was the thing she could force into no pattern she owned. The days ran out, and after them the first of the weeks, and the Duke asked of her nothing whatever. He was scarcely in a room with her, and when he was, he did not regard her as a man regards a woman he intends to take. He regarded her, when he regarded her at all, with that same still gray heed that had no hunger anywhere in it. And then he turned from her and was gone about his affairs, and the price went on not being named, until she began, slowly and against the grain of every instinct in her, to entertain the impossible notion that there was none. And the notion frightened her worse than any price could have done, for a price she knew how to brace against and meet and discharge, and this she did not know how to meet at all. She came, in those weeks, to learn the house and the pattern of its days. And by the pattern of its days she came, with no design of doing so, to learn the man. Idle he was not. That was the earliest thing she came to know of him, and it took her aback, for she had imagined a man who wanted for nothing as a man who did nothing, wearing his days away behind a barred door. The Duke of Ravensmere labored quietly and without pause at the governance of a great estate and no little else besides, and he did the most of it upon paper, in that plain, deliberate hand, out of a study whose door commonly stood open, and whose quiet, she came to see, was never an empty quiet, but always a working one. Letters went out from Thornwood by the score, and money went out at their backs, and Kasia, who bore the old lady company down those long days, and went freely about the house, began to catch, in glimpses, where the money went. She caught the first of it by chance, on a raw gray morning in her third week. Lady Honoria had sent her down to the village upon an errand of wool, and coming back past the churchyard, she found a cluster of women about a cottage door, and among them a young maidservant she knew a little by sight, but a girl called Pen, who worked at one of the farms, and who stood now white and trembling with a bundle in her arms and plainly nowhere to carry it. The girl had been turned off, Cassia pieced together at the edge of the group, turned off without a character upon the word of a mistress at some house, a distance off, who had lost a brooch and wanted a thief, and had lit upon the handiest friendless girl to be one, the brooch being since discovered, fallen behind a press where it had lain all along. There was no calling the word back once it was spoken. A maid put out for theft, whether she had thieved or not, was a maid who did not eat, and every woman in that helpless kindly ring of them knew it, and not one of them could mend it. And so they stood about her as folk stand about a drowning they have no way to reach. Cassia went home with the weight of it in her, for she knew that manner of ruin from the inside of it, the ruin that fastens on a name and will not be worked loose by any truth at all. She said nothing of the matter to anyone. But a week after, walking down again, she saw the girl Pen at the pump in the yard of Thornwood's own home farm, a clean apron on her, her color returned, scolding a boy over a spilt pail with all the everyday temper of a person who is sure of a place to wake to in the morning. Cassia asked Mrs. Aldous of it, careful and sidelong, and Mrs. Aldous, who loved her master and did not always keep close watch on her tongue where he was in question, told her the plain of it. The girl had been taken on at the farm by his order. A line had gone down from the study to the steward, in the deliberate hand, that the girl Pen was to be found a place, and no questions raised over her, and that any man on the estate who spoke the word thief in her hearing would answer for it, not to the steward, but to the Duke in his own person. And that was the whole of it. No one was charged. No one was made to carry the debt of it about. A friendless girl was merely wordlessly set back upon her feet and left to keep them, and the whole of the thing was managed from a study without the Duke so much as setting eyes upon her. She came upon the like of it again after that. Once she had got the knack of seeing it. It lay all through that country, quiet and past all tracing, if a person knew to look. Money went to an old man in the high cottages, whose roof had gone in the autumn gales, and the roof was made good before the frost came by men who said, when he pressed them, that it was the parish had seen to it, though the parish had not in living memory seen to any such thing. Money went, by way of a lawyer in the county town and a fund that carried no name Cassia could ever run to earth, to the widow of a man killed in the quarry, so that her pension seemed to come out of the empty air. A poor, quick-witted boy of the village was got away to a good school, his fees discharged by a hand he was never meant to know, always the same care behind it. Always the gift so arranged that it could not be followed home, could not be thanked, could not be turned into a chain to bind the one who took it. She fell into talk with one of them herself, an old man by the name of Corbett, out walking the low fields one bright, hard afternoon. He did not know her for who she was, nor where she lodged, and he spoke of his mended roof as country people speak of a marvel, half laughing over it and half not. Some fund, they had told him, some fund had done it, but he had never in his life, he said, heard of a fund that came over a man's own wall in the black frost before daylight, to stand looking up at the set of a fresh roof tree, and was away again over the same wall before a body could get down the stair to it. He had watched him at it. The old man said, the tall dark one from the hall, the one that keeps himself to himself, up in the gray before the sun with his face lifted to the ridge of the thatch and then gone. There is a gentleman hereabout, he said, that does more quiet good in a 12-month than the whole bench of them that preach it on a Sunday, and has got some old herd on him that will not let him own to it. I say a good word for him of a night, miss, though I have no name to hang the word upon. I dare say it finds the road to whoever is owed it well enough without. Cassia carried that home in her, and it did not leave off. She had come to Thornwood in the belief that she was the one creature in all that country who owed the Duke of Ravensmere a debt she could put no name to. She understood now that she stood among a whole silent host of them, scattered through the fields and the cottages and the lanes, a whole quiet nation of the wordlessly rescued, who held a nameless man in their prayers and never once supposed he had any name to give. There was a strangeness in finding oneself among a company. One had believed oneself alone, and it was a warming thing, besides on a cold road home. She asked Lady Honoria of it once, feeling her way. For a while together the old woman gave no answer. He will not be thanked, she said at last, and I would have you understand that it is not humbleness in him, for you will be tempted to name it humbleness, and it is nothing of the kind. It is a colder thing than that, and a sadder. He has stopped believing that any part of himself that is only spoken, his thanks or his good opinion or his given word, carries the least weight in the world. And so he has taken to dealing only in the parts of a man that can be handled and weighed. Coin can be weighed, a sound roof can be weighed, a boy's schooling is a solid fact you may go and look at. There are things a man may do without unstopping his mouth, and my godson has come, over a long, grinding while, to put his whole trust in none but those. She looked at Cassia then, and there was something worn and grave and level in the look. He was not made so. That is the part of it you have not been told, and I will not tell it, for it belongs to him and not to me, though I am past believing he will ever tell it himself, but he was not made so. There was a time he was the most unguarded soul you could hope to meet, and he had a tongue that ran the day long, and he held, as the young will hold, that a true thing needs only to be said out clearly, and the world is bound to hear it. He was broken of that belief. I stood by while it was done to him. I've watched him settle the cost of it, morning on morning, for 11 years, and I would lay down the rest of my own life to buy it back for him, and I cannot, for the one soul living who might unmake it is himself, and he has given over believing there is any good in the attempt. Cassia carried that home with her, too, and after it, she began to watch the Duke by a different light. Not for the price any longer, for she had let the looking for a price fall away. She watched him now for the hurt. And by slow degrees, in the way of a house shut in together through the closing down of a northern winter, they came to a knowledge of one another, the man who would have no one, and the woman no one would have, though scarce a word of the coming to it was ever spoken aloud between the two of them. It grew up in the library at the gray hour before the house was stirring, which came to be the property of the pair of them. She had meant at the outset to keep clear of him there, having read the slip that named his dawn habit. But she found he did not, as it fell out, mind her being by. If anything, he appeared to court it, arriving at his hour to find her already curled in the deep chair at the far window, over a book, and something in the carriage of his shoulders would loosen, and he would take up his own reading a small way off, and the two of them would keep the gray light between them in a silence that by every law ought to have been past bearing, and was not. Never in her life had she been so much at her ease inside a silence. They fell, after their own fashion, to talking, which is to say that at the first she talked and he did not, and then little by little he did. She would put some remark to the room about the book she held, an argument that seemed to her a fool's, some line that had caught in her half to herself and half to the room, and he would listen with the whole of that gray attention, and after a space he would answer. His answers were few and dry and laid down with the caution of a man who has learned to distrust his own tongue, and spends it therefore like a miser. But when they came, they were exact and often, to her surprise, wickedly to the point. She had been reading a solemn old treatise upon the government of great households, left there by some devout forebear, and had said aloud that its author had plainly never governed anything weightier than his own appetite, or he would have found out that ordering others upon paper and doing the thing oneself are two separate labors. The Duke, without lifting his eyes, remarked that the author had in fact governed a household of 200 souls, and had contrived in a long life never to learn the given name of one of them. She laughed, the first laugh to leave her within those walls, and told him that was cruel, and very likely just, and asked whether he thought well of any living person at all. He weighed it. Not often, he said. It spares a man the disappointment of being proved wrong in the article twice over. And then, after a silence in a lower voice, and not turning his face to her, he allowed that there were one or two he had lately been wrong about in the kinder direction, that they gave him a good deal more disquiet than the whole of the rest together, and that he was beginning, against his settled judgment, to think the disquiet fairly bought. He did not look at her while he said it. He looked at the gray of the window, and Cassia found she could return him no answer aloud, and so she gave him none, and only kept the words, folding them away inside herself as she folded away the worn place of her glove, out of sight where they could be neither taken from her nor spoiled. The garden was the other thing. She came upon it by chance in her 4th week, a walled place at the cold end of the house, behind an old door set in the stone that gave onto a square of ground perhaps 30 paces to a side, closed in on every hand by high gray walls, with the frost lying thick along their coping. It had been a garden of great care once, past all doubt, for the beds still held their old shapes beneath the wreck of them, and fruit trees spread and nailed long ago against the south wall had run to wildness, and a stone bench had gone green with the years, and everywhere stood the black, wet stalks of things left to perish where they grew. It had the particular grief of a place that has been, not neglected, but forsaken, which is another matter altogether, for neglect is a carelessness, and forsaking is a decision. Someone had loved this ground once, and had shut the door upon it of set purpose, and given it over to the winters, year upon year, a long time, and someone had lately begun, very quietly, to call it back. She saw it the instant she looked, being grown used that winter to the seeing of quiet things. In one corner, under the shelter of the south wall, a small square of the old bed had been cleared, of its dead stalks and turned over, and set with fresh roots, their crowns banked up with mulch against the frost. A single winter rose had opened there, one only, a hard pale flower no broader than a crown piece, holding its head up in all that ruin against the gray air, and beside it stood new cuttings staked in that had not, she was quite certain, been there 3 days before. Someone came to this shut and grieving place in the hardest weeks of the year, and worked in it with his own 2 hands, a corner at a time, and told no one, and asked no thanks, and fetched one dead thing after another slowly back into life. She had no need to be told whose hands they were. She stood in the frost and looked at the one pale rose carrying its head in the wreck, and she understood, without a word said to her, more of the man than the whole of Lady Honoria's talking had given her, and a good deal more of him than she was ready to hold. And she went in out of the cold, with her heart moving in a way she had promised herself 2 years since it should never move again. He knew that she had found it. Of that too she was sure, though he never named the thing, for the day after, there lay upon the library table at the gray hour beside her book a single winter rose, cut clean and set down without a word, its stem bound in a twist of paper against the thorns. She took it up to her room and pressed it flat between the leaves of the one book of her father's she had saved out of the sale, and she told herself, as she had told herself, of the fire and the slip of paper and the words she could not answer, that it meant nothing in the world. But she knew by then that it meant a great deal, and that she had begun, in that shut northern house, over lit fires and dry answers, and one rose coaxed up against the wall in the dead heart of the year, to want a thing again. And she knew the end of wanting. She had been taught it 2 years since upon the worst night of her life, and had sworn she was done with it for good. She lay awake that night with the pressed rose inside her father's book beneath her pillow, and was afraid, in the old way, of the one thing she had believed herself gone forever past the danger of feeling. It was Lady Honoria, when all came to all, who let the first thread of the truth slip loose, though she never meant to loose so much of it, and could not have guessed where the thread would run. It was a bright, hard morning near the turning of the year, and a sharp, unsparing humor was upon the old woman, and she looked at Cassia over the top of her needlework with the black eyes gone all at once keen. "You have found his garden," she said. It was not a question. Cassia did not trouble to deny it. "There is one rose out," she said. "Against the south wall, he is bringing it back." "He is bringing it back," Lady Honoria agreed, and laid her needle down, and for a moment the fierceness went out of her and left a thing far older lying underneath. "He let it die 11 years since, the whole of it, in the one season, shut the door on it, and would not have a hand laid to it. And it has stood dead behind that wall from that year to this, and no gardener in my time dared put so much as a fork to the ground, for it was as much as his place was worth to try. 11 years, child, and this winter, of a sudden and with no word to any of us, he is out in the frost with his own hands fetching it up again a single root at a time." She looked at Cassia, and her voice, when it came once more, was very low. "I have not seen that door stand open in 11 years. I should be glad if you would turn over in your mind why he has opened it now, and what manner of thing it was that first made him close it. For it was the one season, the very same, that shut the door upon the garden and shut the door upon every living soul beside. There was a name at the bottom of it, the way there is a name at the bottom of your own misfortune. But that is the length of what I will say, for the rest of it is his, and I have gone further already than I had any business to go." She took her needlework up again, and her old hands were not quite steady over it, and she said no more. And Cassia sat very still in the bright cold room, with the smell of the frost coming in at the window, and understood that she had arrived at the border of a thing far greater than a lit fire or a companion's wages, a thing with a shut garden at the heart of it, and a shut man at the heart of that, and a name somewhere out beyond her sight, that she did not yet know but felt already cold and sure that she was on her way toward. She did not have long to wait for the name, and when it came to her at last, it came, not as a thing dug out in the dark, but as a thing given, freely and at a great cost, by the one person she had never looked to have it from. It was the Duke himself who told her. For some days after Lady Honoria let the thread fall, Cassia went about the house with the old woman's words turning in her like a key that would not quite come round in the ward. A name at the bottom of it, the same as there was a name at the bottom of her own misfortune, the one season that had shut the garden, and the man alike. She did no prying, for prying was not in her, and besides, she had come to feel that whatever lay behind that door was a grief, and not a scandal, and a grief is a thing a person keeps a right to. But the wondering would not let her be, and it must have shown, for the Duke, who read her as readily as his morning page, saw it. He came to her at dusk on the third day, in the garden where she had gone to stand a while by the one pale rose in the last of the light. She heard the old door give behind her, and knew his step, without turning, having learned it that winter, as one learns the tread of a house one loves. He came and stood beside her at the cleared corner of the bed, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, only looked at the rose as she had been looking at it, and she thought he would leave again without a word, as he so often did. Then he spoke, low and even, into the cold. Her name was Amabel, he said. It was her garden. I let it die the year she did. Cassia held very still. She understood that she was being given a thing that had not been given to another soul in 11 years, and that the way to receive it was to make no sound that might frighten it back into him. He told her the whole of it there, in the dark, in that spare, deliberate voice, stopping often. As a man crosses a river he has not crossed in a long time, and must feel for every stone. He had been young, he said, and had thought himself the most fortunate creature living, for he had loved a girl who loved him back, and nothing in the world had seemed likely to prevent them. Amabel had been gentle and quick and merry, and had loved this ground above any room in the house, and meant to be married from it in the spring. And then, over the turn of one winter, she had begun to fail. Slowly at first, and then not slowly. The best men were sent for, and none could name it, or none would save one. A country physician of no great name who came late, and looked at her one long afternoon, and grew very quiet, and took the young Duke aside, and told him, with great fear on him, that this was no natural wasting, that the girl was being poisoned by a slow and secret hand, and had been for months, and that he thought he knew whose hand it was. I believed him, the Duke said. Within the hour, for the moment he said it, 100 things I had not let myself see fell into place. But belief is not proof, and she was past saving whatever we did, and she died before the month was out. And when I stood up afterward and said it aloud, that Amabel had been murdered, and named the one who had done it, the world did not listen. It saw a wild young man out of his mind with grief, making a monstrous charge against a lady of spotless standing, and it decided, quietly, and altogether, that grief had unseated my reason. They were kind about it. That was the unbearable part. They drew the curtains and waited for me to come to my senses, and when I would not unsay it, they kept away. And I learned, at 25, the thing it has taken the whole of my life to make peace with, that a true thing said plainly is not enough, that a man may hold the truth in his 2 hands and shout it in the street and be counted mad for his trouble. He was quiet a while. The rose stood pale between them. So I stopped saying it, he said. I shut the door on this ground because I could not bear to look at it, and I went north, and I stopped saying true things aloud, because saying them had cost me everything and bought nothing. And I set myself instead to the only thing that seemed to me to have any worth left in it. I began to gather the proof that no one would take from my mouth quietly, a year at a time, so that one day I might lay it down in front of them, all in such a shape that not the most comfortable soul among them could look away from it. He turned his head and looked at her. Then, and there was something in the gray eyes she had not seen in them before, a thing held down hard for a long time. It has taken 11 years. I am very near it now. I have wanted, these 11 years, one thing only, and it is not what the world supposes I want. I have wanted to see her name lifted up out of the lie, and the one who did it brought down into the truth. Cassia's heart was going hard and slow. There was a thing coming. She could feel it coming the way one feels. The ground began to fall away in the dark, and she did not want it, and could not stop it. The physician, she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. The country physician of no great name, the one who came late and saw the truth and told you. Yes, said the Duke, you know his name. I have known it, he said, since the day you stood in my library and would not speak yours. I have known it for 11 years. He said it very gently as she had ever heard him say anything, and it was the gentleness that told her before the words did that the falling ground had no bottom. His name was Edmund Merrill. He was your father, and the same hand that poisoned Amabel and let a country doctor take the blame for failing to save her, that same hand, 9 years after, when it grew afraid the doctor still lived and remembered and might yet be believed, reached out again and branded him a poisoner in his turn, and broke him, and buried the last witness who could undo her. Your father was not ruined by ill chance. He was ruined on purpose by the same person, for the same reason, to bury the same truth. Your grief and mine are not two griefs. They are one, with one name at the root of it. Cassia found that she had sat down upon the green stone bench without knowing she had moved, and that she was gripping the cold edge of it with both hands, as though the garden might tip. "Say the name," she whispered. "Vespera Crane," he said, "Lady Vespera Crane." For a long time Cassia could not speak. 2 years of a settled and particular grief were coming apart inside her and forming into something she had no practice in feeling. Her father had not been a careless old man who erred and could not bear the shame. He had been a physician who saw a murder the great and good preferred not to see, and said so, and went on saying so, and was destroyed for it as coldly as the girl in the garden had been. He had died believing himself a byword. He had been, all the time, the bravest man in that whole cowardly story, and he had died not knowing it. He never knew, she said at last. He died thinking that everyone believed the worst of him, that even... She could not finish it. The Duke did not touch her. She would understand later that he did not believe he had the right. But he came and sat at the far end of the bench, near enough that the cold of him and the cold of her were one cold, and said, "I brought you here because I owed him a debt I can never discharge, and because I could not leave his daughter refused at doors while I had a door to open. That is the truth of why you are here, and you have a right to it. It was a debt. I will not dress it as anything finer." And there it was, the thing she had waited for through all those weeks, the price named at last, only it was not a price but its very opposite, and worse than any price could have been. She had let herself imagine overlit fires and one grown rose, that the care shown her was care for herself, for the woman she was, and not the daughter she had been. And here he was telling her, in his honest, terrible way, that it had been a debt to a dead man from the first, that she had been a thing owed and paid. She was glad of the dark, but she did not leave off loving him for it. That was the trouble. She loved him the more for the 11 years of quiet labor, for the shut garden brought back a root at a time for a man so wounded, spending his one life, not in bitterness, but in the slow assembling of another's justice. She loved him and knew now that she must not, and she set herself, on the cold bench in the dark, to the hard old work of wanting nothing, which she had done before and could do again. She did not do it. Something else happened first. 3 nights after, the Duke fell ill, and Cassia learned that she was, after all, her father's daughter in more than name. She thought afterward that the telling had done it, that 11 years of a thing held down will take a cost from a man when at last he lets it up, and that his body had simply presented the bill. He was found in the gray morning, fallen across the library table where he read, burning with a fever that climbed through the day no matter what was done, until by nightfall he did not know the room he lay in. The nearest physician was a day distant on bad winter roads. Mrs. Aldous wept in the passage. Lady Honoria, who had buried a husband and 2 sons and was past weeping, stood at the foot of the great bed with her jaw set like a trap, and said that they would lose him, that she had seen this fever take stronger men, and that there was no help nearer than God. Cassia rolled up the sleeves of her plain gray gown and said that there was help nearer than that, and that its name was in the room, and she sent Mrs. Aldous for hot water and clean linen and the contents of the still room, and she sat down beside the man she had resolved to want nothing from, and fought for his life 3 days and 3 nights with the whole of what her father had taught her, before the world decided her father knew nothing. She brought the fever down by inches and let it climb and brought it down again, and did the 100 small, unlovely things that stand between a fevered man and the dark, and did not sleep and did not leave the room. Somewhere in the middle of the 2nd night, when he was at his lowest and her strength nearly out, she found she was holding his hot hand in both of hers and saying his given name, Lucian, low, over and over the way you call to a person gone too far off to hear, telling him he was not to die, that he had not yet done the thing he had lived 11 years to do. He did not wake, but the fever broke before dawn, all at once the way a hard frost breaks, and he came up out of it, slow and weak, and himself, he was a long time mending, and in that time the thing between them changed, though still they scarcely spoke of it. He had seen her through the broken glass of the fever, do for him what no one had done since he was a boy. The ledger of debt had a strange new entry now, and it did not run the way the old one had. The rescued had become the rescuer. Neither of them knew what to do with it, and so they did the thing they had learned over a winter, which was to sit in a working silence, and be, for a little while, not alone. It could not last, of course. Lady Vespera Crane saw to that. She had a long reach and a longer memory, and had not kept herself safe, and admired for 11 years by failing to hear things. Word came to her, as word comes to such people, that the Duke of Ravensmere had taken the disgraced Marrow girl into his northern house, and that the two of them were turning over old papers and asking old questions in quiet corners of 3 counties. She was far too clever to wait and see what it might grow into. She struck first, and she struck as she had always struck, not with any blade a person could see, but with a whisper. The whisper ran ahead of any proof, as whispers do. It ran south into rooms that had lately closed against Cassia, and it was this: that the mad Duke of Ravensmere, who had raved 11 years ago against a blameless lady and been pitied for it, had now installed the daughter of a convicted poisoner beneath his roof under the name of a companion, and that between them the poisoner's girl and the madman were cooking up the old wicked charge afresh. She, for the money in it, and he because grief had rotted his wits past mending. It was a beautiful piece of work, as such things go. It did not trouble to deny the coming accusation. It poisoned the well it would be drawn from, so that whatever the Duke should stand up and say, and whatever proof he should lay down, the world would already know the shape of it before he opened his mouth. The ravings of a madman, and the poisoner's girl who had bewitched him. Lady Vespera Crane had done it once before and buried a murder with it. She had every reason to think it would serve a second time. It was Cassia who understood before the Duke did exactly what the whisper meant, and the understanding of it undid her. She saw it whole one gray afternoon and went cold to the bone. She was the flaw in his 11 years, the one thing Vespera could use. As long as she stood in that house, the truth he had spent his life assembling could be waved aside as the invention of a poisoner's daughter and the man she had bewitched. The proof would not matter, nor the witness. Her presence was the lie that would swallow every true thing he said, exactly as it had 11 years before. She had come to him a thing owed, and had become, without meaning it, the thing that would cost him the one victory he had bought with his whole ruined life. There was only one thing to be done, and being her father's daughter, she did not flinch from it. She must go, take herself out of the tale altogether, so that when the Duke stood up at last to clear Amabel and her father, he stood clean, a Duke alone, with his proof and no poisoner's girl beside him for the world to point at. It would cost her the only home she had known in 2 years, and the man she had come against all sense to love, and even the sight of her father's name lifted up, for she would not dare be there to see it. She let none of it weigh in the scale. She had watched her father put the truth above his own safety, and lose everything for it, and found, in the cold of that afternoon, that she was made of the same stuff, and was almost glad to find it. She would go quietly, in the gray of the morning, the way she had come. She had not reckoned on his waking early. She came down through the sleeping house in the last dark with her single case in her hand, and one thing besides that she owned now which she had not owned before: a pressed winter rose in the leaves of her father's book. She had meant to leave no word, having found across the long night that there were none that would not either wound him or betray her, and she was at the foot of the great stair with her hand on the cold bolt of the door when his voice came out of the dark behind her. "Ah, you would go without telling me," he said. It was not a question. He came down the last of the stairs in his shirt sleeves, still pale from the fever, and stood a little way off, and he did not try to come between her and the door, which she thought afterward was the thing that nearly broke her, that even now he would not stand in her way by force. "I have to go," she said. "You know why, or you will. I am the thing she will use against you. As long as I am here, everything you say can be called a lie, and she will call it one, and they will believe her, for it has always been easier to believe her than you. If you are to clear them, Amabel and my father both, you have to stand up alone. I will not be the flaw that lets her win a second time. I would rather never see it done than be that." He was quiet a moment, then said, "Sit down, please. Bite 2 minutes, and if you will still go, I will call the carriage myself and see you safe, on my honor. But sit down first, for I am going to say a thing I have not said to a living soul in 11 years, and I cannot say it to your back." She should not have sat. She knew she should not. She sat. "I did not bring you here to pay a debt," he said. "That was true when I began, and it stopped being true so long ago that I cannot find the day it changed. I told you it was a debt because it was the safe thing to tell you, and because I have not, in 11 years, let myself say a true thing aloud, for saying it has only ever cost me. But I am done with that. I have watched where it leads. It leads to a shut door and a dead garden, and a man who calls the best thing in his life a debt, because he is too much a coward to call it by its name." He drew a breath, and she saw what it cost him, and understood that this, not the fever, was the nearest he had come to dying. "I love you, not as a debt to your father, not as a penance. As yourself, for your own plain, brave, stubborn self, that sat 3 nights by a stranger and would not let him die, I am asking you to stay, not as a companion but as my wife. I have refused the whole world for 11 years, and I would refuse it 11,000 more, and keep only you." And Cassia Marrow, who had wanted exactly these words with a want that frightened her, did the hardest thing she had ever done in a life that had asked a great many hard things of her. She said, "No, you cannot know that," she said, and made her voice steady on purpose that he might believe her, which was its own small cruelty. "You have lived 11 years shut in with a dead girl's garden, and not looked at a living woman in all that time, and then one comes under your roof, a woman you owe, who nursed you through a fever. Of course, you think it is love. It is gratitude, and guilt, and the very debt you swore it was not, all wearing the one face. And under every part of it your heart is still out there with Amabel, where it has been for 11 years, and always will be." Her voice caught, and she mastered it. "I will not be the living woman you keep in the house where the dead one is buried. I will not be second to a grave. I would rather go now whole and grieve you cleanly than stay and watch you look at me for 20 years and see her. Let me go and clear them and be free of all of us." It was not the whole of the truth, and some part of her knew it even as she said it. But she had built it carefully across the long night, every word, precisely because it could not be argued against, because it turned his own honesty into a wall he could not climb. She saw it land. She saw the man who had opened a door shut for 11 years watch it swing quietly closed again from the far side, and made herself watch him bear it, because she owed him that much. He did not argue. That was the worst of it, for a man who has learned that the truth said plainly changes. Nothing does not argue when he is refused. He only looked at her a long moment, then inclined his head as he had the first morning in the library and said very low, "Then I will do as I said. I will see you safe." And he handed her into the carriage himself with a courtesy worse than any anger, and stood in the cold courtyard in his shirt sleeves, and watched her carry her south into the grey, and did not lift his hand. She thought that was the end of it. It was not. It was the turning of it, for the Duke of Ravensmere did a thing she had not counted on, a thing she had made it impossible for herself to be there to see. Refused, and alone, with nothing left to gain and no one at his side to be pointed at, he went south, within the week, into the thick of the world that had broken him, and carried with him the whole of the proof that 11 patient years had gathered. Her father's own notes, in his plain, honest hand, setting down in cool, exact language the true cause of a young woman's dying, and the name he laid it to. A witness found at last, who had carried Lady Vesper Crane's dark errands long ago, and feared for her life to tell it. A chain of small, proven facts, each nothing by itself, together past any comfortable soul's power to look away from. He chose his ground with care. It was at a great assembly in Bath, in the same city where Cassia had been turned from every door, before the very people who had shut them, that the Duke of Ravensmere broke 11 years of silence and spoke the truth a second time. Only now he did not speak as a wild young man with grief for his evidence. He spoke as a man who had spent his life making certain he could not be waved away, and laid the proof down piece by piece in that hushing room, and named Lady Vesper Crane before them all as the poisoner of Amabel and the destroyer of Dr. Edmund Marrow, and never once raised his voice. He did not need to. The truth, laid down in a shape the world cannot find it convenient to deny, makes its own noise. A poisoner's daughter at his side would have given them their excuse, and Cassia had been right in that. She had been wrong only to think he could not do it without her. He did it because she had freed him to do it clean, and he did it for her though she was not there to see, and that, though neither of them yet knew it, was the answer to everything she had said in the dark. Lady Vesper Crane did not fall in an hour. Such people never do. But she fell. The whisper she had loosed turned in her hand and became a roar she could not govern, and the doors that had opened to her for a lifetime began, one after another, to close. And the same world, in the same breath, discovered that it never truly believed a word against poor Dr. Marrow, that fine, upright man so cruelly used, and turned to his daughter with its arms flung wide. The doors of Bath that had shut in her face sprang open as though they had never closed, and cards came in a flood. And the same women who had held their letters out through the narrowed gap of a door now begged the honor of her company, and let her understand they had always had their private doubts about that dreadful business. Cassia received it all with a still face. She had learned in 2 hard years what such warmth was worth, and wanted not one card of it. Their scorn had not broken her, and their sudden esteem could not mend her. The one thing she cared a farthing for was a dead man's name set right, and that they could not give her, for it had been given already, by a man who asked nothing back in a room she had refused to be in. He came to her himself, at the last, on a bright, cold morning, at the turn toward spring. She opened her own door to him, there being no one else to do it, and they stood a moment on either side of the threshold, the man who had refused the world and the woman who had refused him, and neither seemed able to find the beginning of it. Then he took from his coat a thing she had not looked for, a letter, worn soft at the folds with much carrying, and he held it out to her. "Your father wrote this," he said, In the last month of his life, he did not write it to you. He wrote it to me, for he had reached out to me at the end, being the one man left living, who he knew had believed him. He sent me the proof, so that it should not die with him. And at the foot of it he set down a thing that was not for me at all, and asked me, if ever it came into my power, to carry it to you. I have carried it 2 years. I could not give it to you until I could give you his good name along with it. Now I can. It is yours. I will stand outside while you read it, if you would rather. But she did not let him go outside. She read it there with him in the doorway, her hands shaking so she could scarce hold the paper, and the last cruel thing she had carried without knowing, she carried it came apart as she read. For she had believed these 2 years, a thing she had never once said aloud, because it was too sore to say. She had believed her father died, thinking she had abandoned him. They had been kept apart at the end, by his own wish that she not see his ruin, and by cruel small workings she only now understood. And her last letters had gone unanswered, and she had stood at his grave, certain he had died believing his own daughter had turned from him with the rest. And here, in his own plain hand in the last month of his life, was the proof that he had not. He knew why she could not come. He wrote and thought the better of her for minding it. Tweed never for 1 hour doubted her, and she was not to let the world's verdict on him become her own, for he knew what he was, and knew that she knew it too, and that was riches enough for any man to die with. His one grief was that she might never learn the truth of him, and his one hope that someday she would. He blessed her, and told her to live and be happy, and not to spend her life guarding a grave. He had written that last line. She saw, not knowing how far ahead it would reach, nor to what. When she could see again, she found that the Duke had not moved, and that he was watching her with the whole of that gray attention, the attention that had frightened her the first morning in the library, and did not frighten her now, at all. You did all of it, she said. You cleared them both, after I refused you, with nothing to gain, alone, the way I told you to. And you did it for him, and for her. And she stopped, for the thing she had built so carefully in the dark was falling down at last, every plank of it. A man does not do that for a debt, nor for a woman he is only grateful to. I was wrong. I built you a wall out of your own honesty, and hid behind it because I was afraid, and you took it down without once arguing, only by going and doing the truest thing I ever saw a man do. You told me my heart was in the ground with Amabel Lucian, he said, and she felt the strangeness of his own name spoken back in her voice. Let me answer it now, for I could not then. It was in the ground with her for 11 years. That much is true. You did not put me there beside her. You are the reason I climbed out. Bringing that garden back was not a betrayal of her. It was the first living thing I had done since she died, and I did it because you had come into the house, and a dead man cannot grow roses. She would have flung that door open years ago and told me not to be a fool. Loving you is not putting a living woman where a dead one was. It is being alive again, which is the one thing her murder took from me, and the one thing you gave back only by reading at my fire in the gray of the morning. He paused, and said the plainest thing of all. There is no debt left between us. The world has heard the truth. Your father's name is his own again, and hers is, and you are free, and so am I. I am not offering a payment, for nothing is owing on either side. I am only a man at a door asking a woman he loves if she will have him. You may still say no, but you can no longer say it is anything but love, for I have proven it the only way I know how to prove anything, by doing and not by saying. And Cashmero, who had been refused at every door in England and had learned to keep her back straight through all of it, and who had this once done the refusing herself and been wrong, stepped over her own threshold and into the arms of the man who would have no one but her, and said yes. They were married in the spring from the garden, as Amabel had once meant to be, and Cassia felt no shadow in it, only a keeping of faith, the living carrying gently forward what the dead had been robbed of. The walled ground came all the way back that year onto the two of them, a corner, and then a whole bed, and then the length of the south wall, until, by high summer, it was as it must once have been, and the old door at the cold end of the house was never shut again. Lady Honoria lived to see it, and pronounced it the only sensible thing her godson had done in 11 years, and took a great deal of credit that was not strictly hers, and no one had the heart to argue. And on the wall of the library, where the gray morning light came in and where the two of them still kept the early, quiet hour that had made them, there hung after that a small framed thing that visitors often asked about and were seldom told the whole of. It was a single winter rose, pressed flat and gone the soft brown of old paper, the first bloom a dead garden had given up to a man who had begun, against all his long practice of despair, to hope. Kecia had carried it in her father's book to Bath and back, through the refusing and the leaving and the saying of no, and never once let it go, not even on the morning she believed she was leaving him forever. It hung there for the rest of their long life together, and it stood, though they never said so aloud, for all the rest of what had been given up for dead and brought back living. A garden, a good man's name, a shut heart, and a woman on a doorstep in the cold, to whom in the end every door was opened.